Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite. Sejam muito bem-vindos a mais um webinar do Caos Planejado. E hoje a gente tem muito orgulho de receber o urbanista David Sim, autor do livro Cidade Suave, que foi recentemente traduzido e publicado aqui no Brasil. O David Sim nasceu na Escócia, onde iniciou seus estudos em arquitetura. Ele foi professor na Lund University, na Suécia, e após alguns anos conheceu o urbanista Jan Gehl em Copenhague, com quem ele estudou e trabalhou por muitos anos, e a quem ele se refere como padrinho do planejamento urbano humanista. Hoje, David trabalha como consultor e já se envolveu com projetos em diferentes cidades do mundo. Em 2019, ele lançou o livro Soft City, foi traduzido para o português em 2022, como Cidade Suave. O livro enfatiza aspectos simples e cotidianos que são essenciais para projetar espaços urbanos que ofereçam qualidade de vida aos moradores das cidades, reforçando a importância da densidade, da diversidade, dos modais ativos e da escala humana. A gente vai falar um pouco sobre o trabalho do David, sobre o conteúdo do livro nesse webinar. Você pode adquirir o livro Cidade Suave com um desconto do Caos Planejado, usando o nosso cupom CAOS15, que a gente vai colocar aí na tela, e no link da descrição. Welcome, David, once again, and feel free to begin your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And I'm sorry for everybody listening and watching. I have a very big presentation. I'll try to do 200 slides in about 30 minutes to give you a little bit taste of what the book's about and what the Soft City thing is. And I suppose you could start with saying, what are cities for? And is it an invitation to be a citizen? And why is it that some city environments, here's a picture from Italy, invite us to be citizens? And other buildings, there are environments that are okay, but we don't feel the same invitation to participate and be a citizen. And these questions, I guess my teacher, this is Jan Gehl, now he's 89 years old, he's, if you can see here, the Robin Hood of architecture. He was very fascinated by what makes good places for people. And he was very critical of the modernist architecture, which all over the planet became the norm from the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s onwards. And this questioning the value of the functional city. But here's also was a love story, because Jan Gehl fell in love with an environmental psychologist, Ingrid. And she was very critical of these environments that the architects made. She said, you don't really understand people. And she really asked questions about what cities do, how they function. And together, Jan and Ingrid, they studied the life in cities. They went to Italy, for example, they mapped, they observed how people use city. And just like that earlier photograph, you see people hanging out in the colonnades. And you ask these questions, how do people use cities? And of course, it sounds maybe from that Italy and Denmark are very far apart. And when Jan Gehl came home from Italy, talking about how to make better cities, everybody laughed at him, because how could it possibly be relevant? And you see, here's a satirical drawing from the newspaper, showing like as if Danish people would behave like Italians. And you can see in the front the espresso coffee and the macaroni and people drinking coffee under an umbrella. Because in the 1960s and 70s, this was so ridiculous. And if you know, Copenhagen was a city of cars, it was a cold climate, Lutheran people, but nobody could have imagined that in one generation, that even Danes would be sitting underneath the umbrellas and living like Italians, that the Dolce Vita could come to Denmark, if you understood how to make places that people would want to use them. And so here's Jan Gehl. He's now an Ingrid, his wife, 89 years old, still going strong. But it was back in 1971 that Jan Gehl published Life Between Buildings, the first of his many books, to explain the important part of architecture not being about the purpose of architecture to make buildings, but to create whole environments where the in-between was where life happened. Now, I'm so old that 1971, I was already active in architecture. I was making my first experiments, building my own city in my living room in Scotland with my Lego bricks. And my mom was going a bit crazy because this city project was taking forever. And I guess maybe when I was 5 years old, I said one of the smartest things, because when my mother said, "When will your city be finished?" I replied, "It's a town, Mum. It will never be finished." And that's something to think about, that when we build cities, it's not like a piece of art. It's more than just an object. It's a living thing. It will never be finished. And also as a child, I was very interested in books about cities. And you'll know some of these children's books where they show life in a city, where you see the traffic and people moving, people working in the city. I suppose this really fascinated me, this idea of all the things that make a city work and why we have cities, because it's a purpose of working and living and exchanging. And you can see these jokes on social media why people wish that as adults that the city could be more like the children's books of our childhoods. And I found this quotation from Louis Kahn: "A city should be a place where a child walking down the street can feel what they want to be someday." And the idea that somehow the city is a place which allows us to be the best version of ourselves. And so that means there are many different kinds of places we need to create so everybody can find their spot, their place in the city to be themselves. But you might be wondering, the suave, how could a city possibly be soft? What do we mean by soft? Well, I guess there's maybe two parts to this. One is it's soft like the senses. We see, but we also smell, we hear, we touch, we even taste the city. And the joy as a human being to walk past the baker, and this little window allows us to speak to the baker, but also smell the bread, smell the coffee. The feeling of the cool air on your skin as you balance and you ride your bicycle, the sensory experience, the joy of being a human being. And also the joy of being a human being is the sociable city. It's just a bench, a little bench outside the shop, but it creates a social opportunity, allowing people to come together and be sociable together. And this kind of image you'll probably recognize of nice places in Brazil when the climate allows, but where you can feel connected to everything around you. And maybe here the most sociable image I could find, the sensory city, and this is in Sweden, just 20 kilometers of where I am right now. And who would imagine Swedish people dancing tango on a spring evening? And if you get the environment right, this is what it could be like. Maybe this is not as exciting. Here's Swiss people playing chess. That's not as exciting as dancing tango. But here you can see it's in a lonely world. This gives a legitimate excuse for men to hang out in the space together. So a little bit of social contact in a very lonely world. You've got a legitimate excuse to be there, even to start a conversation, to say, "Oh, he played badly." A legitimate excuse to have contact with other human beings. So it's about connecting people to give them sensory and sociable experiences. And going back to Italy, Jan Gehl talked about going to Italy. And of course, when we go on our holidays to Italy, why do we do that? Because it's a fantastic sensory and social experience. And you can see on the square here in Venice, the boys kicking the football against the round back of the church. It's a very exciting football game because the balls fly in every direction. But what's really amazing that the children are in the same space. Look in the background, you see that umbrella, the parasol, and in the same place, the adults are there having a cappuccino or a spritz, and together in the same space, the adults are enjoying being with the adults, children with the children, and a small, compact space, everyone's together, enjoying themselves, having a good time in an urban context. Now, Venice may seem very far away from the projects we make today. That seems to yeah, Venice is nice, but we don't build Venice today. But if you go back to Malmö, where I showed you before with the dancers, is this so far? If you look at the scale of the buildings, the color, the fact that there are no cars, there's a little bit of water, maybe we can do something, that the things that you can do in Venice, you can sit down and you look at the water. Well, actually, you can do that anywhere. And, and the scale of Venice with small, cozy spaces, human scale, the beautiful brickwork, the colors, the fact that it's not all straight lines, you don't see what's around the corner. We can actually make this today. And this is Malmö again in Sweden. And if you look at the color and the materials and the plants and the scale, you see something which has got the scale and color and quality of Venice, but it's modern. It's not a copy. It's not a pastiche. It's got the warmth and enjoyment. And if we compare Malmö on the left and Venice on the right, you can see they have the same qualities. It's modern architecture on the left, but the qualities, the sensory experiences are kind of the same. And I find it very fascinating, the idea that we can learn from the old places. We don't have to make copies of them, but we can learn about the scale and the materials and the color and the sociable opportunities that they represent. And of course, I mean, a bit of water. And why do we like going to Venice? Well, it's colors and materials and senses. And of course, it's not that hard to achieve these kind of things, even in a new place, even in Sweden. The scale, the small scale, the view, the curiosity to go down the street and you're wondering what's around the corner. We can achieve that in architecture, even today, with our modern materials. And for me, it's a little game, the fact to find that we can find the qualities of traditional architecture, we can make them again in modern times today. And even the scale here, look at this very small public space in Venice. And it doesn't take many people to make it look busy. And the same thing, this little pocket of public space, it doesn't take so many people to make it feel busy. I mean, this space in Malmö, not much bigger than an apartment. And yet, for human beings, it's very nice. For the mother, you see the mother at the door there, she sees her daughters, and because she's got this overview, she feels in control. She feels she knows what's going on, and she's comfortable with her little girls playing outside, the doors open, strangers walking past, and that's okay. Because she's got that overview. The scale responds to the scale of the human body. And our little girls can have adventures. There's no traffic to get run over. There are lots of other parents at windows. So other people are watching too, eyes on the street. And these little girls having adventures here, selling coffee and juice, running their own little cafe, selling juice and coffee to tourists. And of course, this is a wonderful way to grow up, kind of having this freedom to explore and have adventures. But also for the mother, it's nice because this opportunity to let you have a little bit of peace, knowing that there are other people watching the children as well. And we can talk about a vacation feeling or a holiday feeling. We see this family again, the mother and the father going out on a date together. It's Tuesday night, and we know it's not, I mean, we see they've bought some pizza, but if you look on the right, you'll see the tray with the glasses and some water. So they've come from the apartment and they've taken a couple of hours off. They've made a mini vacation, going out into the public space to sit by the water, having a pizza, taking your wife on a date, and having a little bit of slack in everyday life, a little break. And, because adult life is hard, that you can have this holiday feeling even in the place you live. And of course, because they're Vikings, they discovered they could swim in the harbor, they could swim in the city. And that's very nice because you can wander around the neighborhood in your bathing cloak, your bathing robe, your bathrobe, as if you were in a resort, as if you're some fancy resort on holiday. But this could be your everyday life, walking around your neighborhood, going for a swim, and leaving the door open, as if it was a village in the countryside, because there's trust in the neighbors that you can leave the door open so the cat can go inside and outside. And in this way, you could say that neighborhood is not just a place, it's a state of mind. And you're thinking how that's very cute. Swedish people dancing tango, little girls selling coffee, going for a swim, because we know we've got huge challenges. Greta Thunberg reminds us, and we know we have a climate challenge. These are pictures of the floods in Copenhagen. We've got a pandemic, and it's not corona. The pandemic is lifestyle diseases, heart disease, obesity. We also have a pandemic of loneliness, very ironic because we're all living in cities, and a pandemic of inequity. And everybody's stuck in traffic. And so you can ask, is urbanization like a solution? Well, maybe if we get this, we can get it right. We have these threats of the climate change, segregation, isolation, inequity, affordability. But can we turn it around and see the city as a solution? And we go back to Malmö again. And this is not just a picture of urban design or a real estate project. This is a picture of democracy. Different kinds of people sharing the same space. It's also a picture of public health, people outside in the fresh air getting exercise. And it's all about relationships. It's about connecting people to the planet, to place, and to other people. Being outside and being connected. And so these are the themes of my book. These are the themes of Soft City. Place, people, and planet. So let's start with place. And it's about living locally. It's about proximity. Picking places where you can be close. And I guess the equation that I'm using for the book is about density and diversity. If you multiply them, you get proximity. The product of density times diversity is proximity. To be close to other things. Like, why do we live in cities? It's not because we want to live in a more expensive place or a more crowded space or a more noisy space. We live in the city because it allows us to be closer to different things. And so all of the ways that we can accommodate difference, diversity, complexity, like having different buildings joined up, and every building can be its own little microcosmos, but they can be built next to each other. So I'm very, very fascinated by the ways that allow us to accommodate different things in the same place. So different ways of doing this. The first one is to think lower and think about layers. And I'm very fascinated by these. I mean, but the cover of the book, you have this doll's house section with the different things going on in different floors, the shops on the ground floor, and the ballet school, and the dentist, and then the apartments upstairs. This picture from the social geography of Paris, this was a critique. But what was fantastic in the historical Paris, although you had the upper class family on the bel étage and the piano nobile on the first floor, and the middle class on the second floor, and the poorer people upstairs, at least at that time, all these people lived in proximity to each other. Today, the poor people live 20 kilometers away and don't have access to the same city. So the idea of layering that allows us to have different things going on. So rather than stacking our buildings, if we layer, if we acknowledge that the ground is different from the middle, is different from the top. So not just stacking, putting the same thing on top of each other, but recognizing that the ground floor should be different. It speaks to the street. It's about eye level. The middle can be something else. The top, which speaks to the sky, can be something else again. And this is the great opportunity that we do something special on the ground floor here, little townhouses in Malmö, and then different apartments upstairs, and then something different again on the roof. So recognizing that the ground floor can perform differently from the middle and the top. And we can find examples to really celebrate this, really make our buildings work much harder, so that we really build in layers. And even the roof can be something special. The ground floor is maybe the most special because you can do different things. You can have businesses, institutions, all kinds of things. So we can do something special with the ground floor. It could be, it's more valuable. It could be shops and businesses and so on. It could be, it could be the art gallery. It could be the medical center, but it could also be a good place to live. And one of the big discoveries we've made is by giving a little garden to the ground floor, we can make the ground floor one of the most attractive places to live. Often many people say that the ground floor is not nice. People see in your windows. But if you have a little garden, suddenly the ground floor becomes like a house. It's a feeling of having your own little house, your own little front garden. And the ground floor can be the most attractive apartment. And what we're discovering today, especially if you've got a family with children, pets, the fact that you've got your own front door, the children can run outside, this little garden can add a huge value. And we're discovering now that the ground floor apartments with the garden sell first. And people maybe even spend 25% extra just to have the ground floor apartment because it's so nice for everyday life. So layers, think lower, but think smaller, lower and simpler. Well, Density can be delivered in many different ways. This is a picture from the book. These are all examples of the same density. And maybe it's hard to believe, and you can see how much gold, how much yellow color there is. With the tall buildings, there's not so much ground floor, not so much penthouse. But the more lower we build, the more ground floor, the more penthouse we can have. Notice that the tall buildings with not so much yellow, but the lower we go, the more yellow of this valuable yellow we get. And of course, more human scale. Now, nobody ever believes this. So I usually, we can deliver density in different ways. The same thing I'll show you in Lego. So if you build 4 stories in Lego, you see every Lego brick is a story. And you can imagine, like, if you build a bigger square, you need to go higher. So it gets higher and higher and higher, and you get further from the ground. And just recognizing that the potential diversity, the potential microclimate is so much better when you build lower. Streets, courtyards, connection to the ground. It doesn't need to, it can be more varied, a bit like Malmö, but we can build this more kind of human scale and have density on the human scale. But one of the great things also in it is the courtyard. And courtyards traditionally in cities are maybe more like a backside where the air conditioning and the parking and stuff is. In Copenhagen, they've just rediscovered to make better courtyards. And by cleaning out the courtyard, you get this magical space in the middle of the city. It's a protected, secure zone. So safe and secure in the middle of the city. You have this big garden shared between the neighbors. And it becomes a wonderful place to bring up children because, kids can run downstairs. There's a protected car-free space where there are other kids to play with. And all the parents can be watching. So it's a really good environment for families in the city with this walk-up height buildings and this protected courtyard, which gives a really great environment. And also, there's a better microclimate. It's always cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. The season starts earlier, which means you can spend more time outdoors, which is important for health and well-being. It's a protected acoustic space. You don't hear the traffic. You can sleep with an open window in the middle of the city. You can hang out your washing. And most importantly, the courtyard represents a common space to create a place to meet your neighbors, to spend time together and have this kind of place for a local community. And then when we look at the scale, rather than we have this kind of like suburban scale of little houses, high rise, this is the missing middle. It's a scale which allows us to kind of have a human scale, but at the same time, a decent level of diversity to have services and the kind of things we need in a city. And so this is kind of, for me, the first part here, this idea in place and understanding the human scale and diversity that we could build densely, but at a human scale. That's number one. Racing through this is number two, is about people getting about and getting on with your life. Everybody's talking about the 15-minute city, but if we really understand time, why time is important, everybody has got the same amount of 24 hours, rich or poor, what your education is, you've only got 24 hours. If you're lucky, you get 8 hours sleep. If you're lucky, you only work 8 hours. You have chores to do, you have to get to and from work, you have to pick up your kids. And often you have very little of this golden your time when you can enjoy time with your children, reading stories, going to ceramics classes, learning French, playing your guitar. The only thing we can change, we still have to sleep, we still have to work, do our chores. If we can reduce travel time, we can get more of this golden time for ourselves. And so I'm interested in all of the minutes that make up our life in the city, how we get from one place to another quickly and efficiently. And so if we think in a way slower but more simple, this is a really simple example in Pontevedra in Spain. It's a crosswalk, but you can see it's really, really wide. It encourages you to cross the street, you feel safe. It's only paint, but just this message that the crosswalk is wide makes you feel safe, encourages you to walk. Also in Pontevedra, a small town, they have this metro map. And actually I was thinking, but is there a metro in this small town? But when you look closely, you discover that the times are in minutes, not just meters. So you know that that's a 1 minute walk, a 2 minute walk, a 3 minute walk, and you can know how long it takes to get around. This is the time machine in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, on the main streets, all of the side streets, the pavement, the sidewalk continues across the side street, which means that when you're walking, the car has to stop. Your 5 minute walk becomes a 3 minute walk because you don't need to stop at every side street. You continue walking, the car has to wait for you. It's simple, instinctive, easy to understand, but it prioritizes the pedestrian. So just changing these small things means that our time, our precious time, becomes more useful. Even here, having a simple way to cross halfway across the street, allowing you to spontaneously cross the street, saves you time. And of course, Copenhagen is the capital of cycling. Everybody cycles. You see grandma and grandpa, the little girl, are cycling. And that's thanks to having a simple system of having separate bike tracks next to the sidewalk, next to the pavement. So it's safe and easy to park. But once you're cycling, you can also stop easily. Remember the bakery and smelling the bread? You can stop spontaneously. You can go inside, buy your bread, and you're part of the city. You're part of the life of the city. And for the businessman, it's very useful because the pedestrian and the cyclist can stop and spontaneously shop. And you can say there's an ecosystem that walking and cycling together with the shopkeepers is part of the convenient ecosystem of the city. And even when you're waiting at the bus stop, you can sit and have a cappuccino while you wait. Your waiting time is also valuable. You can see here in Malmö, the bus stop tells you how much time you've got. You see that big zero because the bus is there. And the cafe has opened next to the bus stop because it's allowing you to use your time more usefully, because your precious 24 hours, you can have that cup of coffee while you're waiting for the bus. And also what's great, as you move through the city at eye level and seeing what's going on, seeing the weather, seeing how people are dressing, seeing that yellow pants are fashionable in Zurich, seeing what's going on, and also recognizing that the bus or the tram is a social space with room for encounters. And understanding the climate that the street, even the street, can be a public space before and after. And here in Copenhagen, where we love the sunshine, we've made a wider sidewalk, a wider pavement on the sunny side of the street, and put the cars in the shade. Now, maybe in Brazil, you would do the opposite, but recognizing that the street can also be a public space and can be furnished accordingly. This public space starts outside your front door. So when we talk about transport, we can talk about transporting development. We can build a high-rise next to the metro, or maybe we can think a different way, and that we start with the journey starts at your window, the staircase, walking up and down to the street corner, to the bus stop, to the pavement, to the bike lane. So we can think about public transport and mobility in the city in a different way. Okay, that was third one, very quickly. Theme of the book, planet. And of course, planet is very abstract, climate change, living with the weather, enjoying being outside, making every aspect of the way the city works, connecting us to the wonderful forces of nature, the weather, the animals, and biodiversity. And can we build our own weather? Here we are in Sweden, and for us, the sunshine on the sunny side of the church, which warms up in the winter, so we can spend time outdoors, the bench next to the wall where I feel warm and secure, or even here in the medieval center of Malmö, of Lund, where you can sit outside as if you're at the beach, enjoying the sunny weather. But what's amazing is, because of the way the buildings have been designed 600 years ago, the public space has a nice microclimate, even in the winter. And you can see there's snow on the ground, and people are still sitting in the sunshine. And this is the idea of making our own weather. Very simply, this little box here, in Malmö, the cold wind is blowing, so it's cold outside. But this little wall creates a microclimate. And so although it's like Siberia outside, inside this wall, the protected wall gives the feeling of being in Italy, even if you're in Sweden. So we can make our own weather. And there's so many ways we can make shade, we can capture the sun. There are natural ways without using energy. We can use the forces of nature to warm up, cool down, create microclimates, create nanoclimates around our buildings, protecting from the rain, protecting from the sun, the arcades, the bay windows, the French windows, the terraces, the decks, the loggias, the gardens, all of the simple things we can do that can connect people better to enjoy the climate more, to enjoy the sunshine, be connected with their neighbors on the outside, which is great for sociability, but also to be protected from the weather, the shade. This is the Italian version. In Australia, in Brisbane, where it's very hot, they've learned from Italy and made a modern interpretation of climate control. So rather than building a new shopping mall, they built the arcade, they use plants, ventilation, and make it possible that even if it's 35 degrees, you can still walk around comfortably and spend outdoors in these naturally cooled environments. For flooding, which is becoming a big question, in Copenhagen, they've created floodable public space. The idea that the public space is designed that with heavy rainfall, it can fill up with water and then drain away slowly over time. This is a gift to the people because it means for most of the year, they've got extra useful public space. And in the local neighborhood, you've got a greener environment, but it's also cleaner and quieter in so many ways. It's because you've got this green stuff helps improve the environment. It's quieter. The leaves capture the nanoparticles. It's quieter. It's more enjoyable. So the green stuff, it's so simple. It's trees and bushes. It reduces the temperature in a natural way and gives us a nicer room. So simple. And finally, this is a picture I said in the beginning that maybe Switzerland was a bit boring with those chess players. Here we are in the Swiss capital, and you're wondering, how can this be the city? In the middle of the city, Swiss people walking around in their bikini and sunga. What's going on? Because it's so hot in Bern, they now have temperatures up to 40 degrees in August. They're jumping in the river to cool down. And what they've done is they've made their existing river swimmable. And with a simple infrastructure of concrete benches and this red painted handle, they've made the water accessible. It's easy to come in and out. And they've created a culture of swimming in their river. And you can see here from the app. But what's important here, rather than talking about climate change and complaining and buying air conditioning, they've made a free democratic system. As long as you've got a swimming costume, you can swim. You can cool down in the water, but you're also connecting people to the realities of climate change because you're making them aware, wow, can we swim in May? Yeah, it's climate change, it's getting hotter. How can the water be so cold? In August, yeah, the glacier is melting. So through a fun activity, you can enjoy being part of nature. So putting all together, smaller, lower, slower, simpler ideas can actually give us a higher quality life, a softer life in the city. And around the world now, we're seeing these courtyards appearing where children can grow up and spend more time outdoors. These forms of building, medium rise, courtyards, more greenery, from Sweden to Los Angeles, you see these typologies appearing, offering a more democratic, more healthy idea of what the city can be. And as Jan Gehl says, it's cheap to be nice to people. And who would imagine that the Swedes would dance tango in public spaces? That's softer in the book. And I'll talk about this now in maybe 27 languages, so the message is interesting. Got a couple of examples to finish with. Here we are in Japan, outside the Shin Marunouchi Tower, maybe the most expensive piece of real estate in the world. And what you see here is just some cheap furniture where the American businessmen, the young women can have fun, old people, everybody can spend time outdoors. It's not the architecture, it's just some cheap wooden furniture and some green stuff. So it's cheap to be nice to people. And maybe the greatest example of the soft city I've ever found, also in Japan, On the old people's home, you could see the young architects cut a hole in the hedge. They made a hole in the greenery to allow the old people in the old people's home to watch the kids playing basketball at the school next door. It's sometimes something very, very simple, which allows the city to become softer. So these are some ideas of what the book's about. Maybe there's time for some questions. I hope that wasn't just too much. That was a tsunami of soft city, a tsunami of softness. I hope it wasn't too much. And I hope I didn't talk too fast.
Oh, David, it was a great presentation. Your book and your presentation and the examples you bring, at least for me, are very inspirational. Coming from Brazil and covering the same challenges that you're putting here for our Brazilian cities. So thank you very much. We will be getting some questions from our supporters through the chat that I will moderate and ask you in a minute. And I would like to start out with the following question. So you have lived and worked in Sweden and Denmark. Copenhagen is maybe one of the softest cities in the world. And maybe a visitor to these cities would think the problem is solved, right? So who is this book for? Who are you trying to influence? And maybe in a broader sense, why write a book on cities?
Okay, well, I mean, that's a really, really good question. I may have mentioned in the preamble we talked earlier. I mean, why write a book now? Because, I mean, we have so many other medias and everything. There's so much online. I suppose the idea was to collect a lot of knowledge in one place. And I think more holistically, there's really a lot of books about the social city. There's other books about the green, sustainable city. There are other books about the economics of cities. My idea was there only is one city, and we have to put everything together and trying to find how there are synergies when we start thinking about sustainability, economic, environmental, social at the same time. They're not separate departments, they're the same. That's been one big idea, is put everything in one place. And also try to find a way to talk about it so it seems relevant. And I think often architects and planners, designers, maybe we can be a little bit pretentious. Maybe we can kind of like make things sound more complicated than they are, so we sound more important. So I really wanted to find a language, and I hope that works in the translation, a language which is accessible. And I was advised, try to write the book so that a 12-year-old could read it. And so that was, I wanted to make it accessible, to demystify some of the questions and also make it relevant. So I suppose that was the kind of the background to the book. And then, I mean, then the only funny thing was the title, because everybody hated the title when I made the start of the project. Like, I can't possibly call it Soft City. It should be Sustainable City or Resilient City. And I thought, well, if you give it a name like that, it sounds really boring. And no, and there has to be a little bit of mystery. And then there's this thing about soft. I thought, okay, that's kind of, it's more open for interpretation. It's not one, there's a softness also has room for, well, what's your soft city? So Anthony, what's your soft city? Roberta, what's your soft? So there's room for interpretation. There's not one soft city. It's more of a kind of a movement, it's an approach. And in different situations, in different contexts, it's really more flexible, it's more.
I love the title. At least for people who study cities, you kind of understand what you're trying to say immediately. It's for me, it takes me back to safety, takes me to a let's say cozy environment. That's a theme you explore in the introduction of the book. So I love the title. And I've been to Copenhagen a few times, and even with my children. And even after leaving the city for a few weeks, it's hard to believe the amount of cyclists on the road and how easy it is to get around by bike. And I was traveling with my wife, and she's not an urban planner, and it seems that it's kind of a no-brainer to whoever lives this lifestyle, right? To incentivize protected bike lanes and bike networks. But we still hear everywhere a lot of resistance to this policy. And the most usual response is, well, we are not Copenhagen, right? We are not Danish, right? Or we are not whatever. What do you think would be a good answer to this response?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to remember, like 40, 50 years ago, when Jan Gehl started talking about Italy, everybody in Denmark said, we're not Italian, we're Danish. We cannot hang out on the squares. We're not Latinos, we're Lutherans, you know. So Denmark has already gone through this kind of shift of changing life, rethinking what it means to live in the city, embracing the sensual and sociable part, because it's not just about, like, you can talk about the bicycle being cheap, you can talk about, you know, no emissions and so on, but the joy, I mean, if you've been cycling with your kids on a cargo bike, being together as a family, you can talk, you know, the kids in the front, this is a wonderful experience. It's a joy to be a human being. And I think maybe when we talk about sustainability and ecology, resilience, all of those heavy subjects, we have to repackage them as something which are really enjoyable. And for me, where the Brazilians, where you've got a superpower, because you must be the most suave, soft people on earth, because your culture is so deep in being super sensual and super sociable. I mean, everything about life in Brazil, it's about, you know, it's about flirting and connection and loving, you know, being with other people. So incredibly sociable, so deeply ingrained in the culture. And also the sensory joy, of going out. I mean, in good places, like, going to the market, walking down the street, the trees, going to the beach, so you have this underlying culture, and you have these pockets of places where it is the greatest joy you can have to be a human being. And I think one of the things is we can maybe compartmentalize those things. And that's why I talked about the holiday feeling or the vacation feeling. Because there's going to go, yeah, when we go to the beach, it's like this. And the beach is super democratic. And we're like, I can wear my sunga and drink juice. But I can't do that in everyday life. And what's happened in Denmark and in other parts of Scandinavia is this idea, well, actually, why don't I have more of this holiday feeling in everyday life? So before work, after work, when I'm cycling to school, cycling to work, it can feel a little bit like being on holiday. The harbor baths, this urban bathing, and it's not warm like Brazil. You have the perfect climate. We don't have the perfect climate. But this idea of like going for a swim every day after work, that you get half an hour or an hour of vacation every day with your colleagues, and so recognizing that you can wrap that into everyday life. And so I think it's about making this so attractive. It becomes something that people want, maybe not because they care about sustainability or ecology. They just want to have this nicer quality of life. And the question is how, you build it up. What are the reasons not to do it? I guess. Is it security? You feel insecure. Both you feel it's not safe in traffic. There's a risk of criminality. So what are the things, maybe you go to the root of those problems? Because I think the Brazilians are far more trained to live this kind of Dolce Vita life than the Danes are. It comes more naturally to you.
That's a great point, and something to think about, to be honest. And we are talking, well, most examples from your book are from towns, from medium-sized cities. Even Copenhagen is a capital city, but I think the municipality is under 700,000 people.
Absolutely,
You do get many examples from Tokyo. Tokyo is maybe one of the best examples of a very large city with soft neighborhoods. But in general, as cities get larger, they tend to get rougher or less soft. Why do you think this happens? Why is Tokyo an exception? And what are your thoughts on New York? That kind of mixes tall buildings and walkability.
Well, I think there's something about
theme
scale.
Of large cities.
Yeah, one of the surprising things about Tokyo is that actually, I think the average building height in Tokyo is like 3 stories or 3.5 stories. Tokyo is surprisingly low. I mean, you imagine it's skyscrapers, but actually, it's only a few quite small part are skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Most of Tokyo is actually quite low, and is very village-like, and is very a lot to do with active ground floors, small individual buildings. And so actually, although it's the biggest city in the world, it's in a way like a series of villages. It's just very human scaled. And that's a big surprise, I think. And it's small buildings. Also, the public spaces are small as well. It's small streets, small parks. And that human scale makes it very, very accessible, very controllable. So I think there's something about the scale. The physical scale really influences things. And of course, there are many, I mean, there are lots of other things about Japanese society, how Japan's organized, very disciplined, which maybe also influence things. But I think the difference in different cities like London, London does have this villagey kind of scale. Also, I think even cities like Paris and Paris, really almost no towers in the metropolitan center. Barcelona, almost no towers. Barcelona is a little bit higher, like if Copenhagen's 4 or 5, Paris is 6, 7, Barcelona's 7, 8, 9, 10, but it's still got a more human scale. The Serra Plans has an incredible density, but a relatively human scale. And then the latest interventions now with the risk of intervention with the interventions now with the super manzanas, the super blocks, improving the street space. So I think scale is really influential. I think New York is complex because there are parts of New York which are not that high. If you go to the village stuff, it's got this kind of more human scale. But there is something about a crazy kind of scale. And I would say for families bringing up children, I don't know how good New York City, at least Manhattan, is for bringing up children. But then you'll need to go over to Brooklyn, and it's 2 and 3 stories. So,
yeah, that's good point. So, a lot of examples that you draw upon are also from old cities, right? That were not planned in the traditional sense. A lot of this softness happened, I would say, quite spontaneously, right? The height limits until the 19th century was imposed by technology. Cars were not even invented. Buildings were connected to the streets. And part of your analysis or part of your work is recovering or recreating qualities from traditional examples. The question I had after reading the book was, what could be different, right? What could be improved from old towns with what we learn today? What do you think, let's say, new projects as the one in Malmo are, let's say, adding as new layers to the old towns that we could interpret as contemporary urban planners?
Okay, let me think about the question. First of all, I was quite conscious. I mean, there are some older examples, but I think I was consciously trying to find new examples of things, or at least even new interventions in old cities, because I didn't want it to be a historical book. And for me, I got very optimistic, for example, with this Malmö project, because it had so many of these nice qualities, but it was totally contemporary. It wasn't a copy of anything. And it was more this idea that there are these universal values about scale and height and so on. And of course, something happened. And I think that there's one thing is about the scale of the kind of like how high buildings are and stuff. But there's also the thing, and having acknowledging the ground floor is different and speaking to the street, eye level experience, but also the joined up thing. And I think the complexity. And I think very often we're obsessed with density, but density alone is not that interesting. What's interesting is when you have the diversity. And I think what saves New York is maybe it's got overall a lot of diversity. And it's more about finding systems which accommodate diversity. And one of the problems is it's hard to create diversity from the start in the way we produce buildings today, because if you look, if you walk around, even, well, maybe not so much in Brasilia because you're in this hyper-modern environment, but if you go to maybe Rio or Sao Paulo, you will see this edificio, like every building was built one building at a time. And then the owner or developer like made something on the ground floor, a shop or a restaurant or an office. And there's a slightly different architecture and everything. And you have this juxtaposition of many different things. That doesn't really happen. Now, one developer built a whole block or 10 blocks of the same thing. And maybe it's just too hard work to make this differentiation. And whether, because the Malmö project was actually built building by building, which was really upset the developers because they didn't like doing that. They wanted to do one block at a time. But I think we maybe need to find other tools, other instruments. Maybe we have to work much harder with the curatorship of the ground floor. So if you're going to build one block at a time, we have to make demands. You have to work much harder to make the ground floors work more. Sorry, I don't know if I've gone a little bit off piece there. So if you want to, I noticed there's some questions in the chat, and about the courtyards. Just as a question here about the courtyards from Victor. The courtyards in Copenhagen are, I would say, semi-private. So basically, they're for the residents. There may or may not be a key. Maybe there's a gate which is not locked, but you make it clear. So the courtyards behind the buildings on the inside of the blocks are essentially private spaces. They're co-owned by the different inhabitants of the buildings. And I think it's important to stress not everything has to be public. It may be publicly accessible that you're allowed as a guest to come in and walk through, but you don't have the right to have a party or a picnic there. It's not public space. And I think differentiating, that's important, that we have totally private, totally public, and then there are things in the middle that are more nuanced with different degrees of control, different kinds of sharing, private sharing, public and private share. But I think this range of things is important. And it's quite important that for the residents, if the courtyards were public, they would not feel so confident with their children playing outside all the time, leaving their bike out there, or the children leave their toys in the courtyard because they know it's not a public space. So I think that differentiation is maybe important. There's a question also about the urban planning regulation, proponents of city. I think often the city officers, the planners know these things. I think it's important maybe to educate the politicians, that the real decision makers, the ones who can decide the policy, that to educate the politicians, and that's maybe some of the people I hope read my book are the politicians. Because if the politicians choose a direction for policy, that can influence how things happen.
David, I wanted to build upon your last answer regarding Brazil and the contemporary project you mentioned from Malmo. So this project in Västra Hamnen, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly.
Yes.
It's I believe it's a let's say an entire neighborhood, right? I think still being developed. But what we have in Brazil is urbanization that is slowing down already, and modernism was very influential in building our cities in the last, say, almost 100 years. So we have tall buildings set back from sidewalks, failing to define lot edges. We had decades of zoning building regulations that created the city that we have today. So what do you think could be done with the existing city? So we're not, let's say, we do have some opportunity to build or redevelop a few buildings, a few lots, a few neighborhoods, but what do we do with what has already been built? So are there design strategies? I don't know. Or are you familiar with our situation here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think, I mean, some things, I mean, okay, in Brasilia in particular is very special because you have like a heritage, which you cannot change. And I think that, I mean, and there, I mean, I love some of the art, some of the architecture is fantastic. The monuments, I mean, for me, coming seeing the cathedral, seeing the Brazilian Parliament, for me, it's like seeing the pyramids. It's really like, really, at the same time, maybe the everyday city, everyday life is made less satisfactory. I mean, the walkability is, it's very difficult to walk in Brasilia. So what to do with the existing place? And I understand that even you're not allowed to have a tramway, because somehow the tramway somehow goes against the original concept of what Brasilia should work. But maybe outside the Brasilia, which is an exceptional place in the world, it maybe has to be preserved. And I think for me, the big subject, and the subject of my next book, is about, I would call it suburbia. How do you make this less urban places work better? Because actually, to be honest, the European city, the center is already, I mean, they work quite well already. You do some acupuncture and it's perfect. I think what's much harder is we have the big, but even in Europe, the majority of the built environment is suburban. It's not urban like the traditional city. I mean, you go to Italy, the town center is tiny, the suburbs are enormous, and that's monofunctional, it's setbacks, it's towers, it's blocks, it's not streets and squares. And so the question is, can we sort of reconnect with these pieces? Also, we have the challenge now with the resources. We don't have the money to demolish and rebuild.
Yeah.
Environmentally, we can't waste the embedded energy in existing buildings. So we just can't demolish things because we don't like them. So we have to work with what we have. And most of my work in the office now is working with existing suburban places that don't work very well. And the question is, can we?
That's amazing. Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's like, can we find more towards the structure? One of the difficulties is why is it that sometimes these modernist housing estates, they never become neighborhoods, they never become a piece of city in the normal way? And there's something about the structure, maybe the lack of private space or the lack of shared, I mean, there's this kind of hierarchy, the articulation of space. So what we're looking at now is, can we gently, with small interventions, have a little bit more clarity? This is actually more public, this is the street. This side of the building is actually more private, is shared, is only for the residents. Can we create a corner? Like if you go to the traditional city, there's the corner, that's where the shop is, the store is, because where the roads meet is a very good place to have a store. Where do you put the little neighborhood store when there is no corner? So can we find a way to make corners? Maybe not with like huge buildings, but like structurally create spaces, understanding the paths and flows. So I think that, I mean, without spending the next 2 hours, I think there are really important questions. Can we, again, take learnings from traditional cities, not to impose the traditional city on top of the modern city, but just understand the elements of pathways, movement pathways, hubs, clusters, corners, differentiating public, private, and shared. So making these kind of differentiations, and they might help us structure the modernist city better. Can we have part of the setback building which maybe speaks to the street? So I think there are ways to do it, and I think at the same time there are sometimes qualities of the modernist city we don't want to lose.
That's a can we build upon this concept? Like, are there opportunities in this redesign of the modernist city to create something that maybe we haven't seen before, right? Like that does draw some qualities from the modernist city, and what do you think these are? At least the best of them.
The best qualities of the modernist city.
Yes, the best qualities of the modernist city, and what opportunities do you see by redesigning and let's say correcting some of the mistakes and creating a type of city that maybe we haven't seen before?
It's a big question. Well, first of all, I grew up as a child of the modern times. I remember as a child, I hated old buildings. And I love the big windows, the generous spaces, the light of modern buildings. I like the style of modern buildings. And so I think there are qualities in many of our modern buildings. And I think what's nice about Malmö, for example, the houses have got big windows. They're modern. There's a modernity in the buildings. So I think this light space, maybe more open plan, interconnection of space. I think that's important elements. I think maybe the playfulness of the best modern buildings you can take with you. There's also maybe a relationship with greenery, like inside outside can be much softer. Like often old buildings are, the process of going from inside to outside is quite painful. And modern buildings open up and step outside. Yeah. And especially, in Brazil where you can live outdoors a lot, and like the loggia kind of life, step outside the deck, that's very important. And I think, a lot of older buildings don't allow you to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think those qualities of modern architecture, of comfort, of living inside, outside, more openly, those qualities. But at the same time, maybe it's better if your deck or your loggia is on a slightly more enclosed courtyard, so it's quieter. The problem is, like in many brilliant cities, you open your big doors and you get all this noise of the traffic in the city, or the smell of the traffic or something. So it's kind of like if you could combine the best qualities of modernist architecture, of light and openness, with the structure of the city. Also, I think this thing about having more defined spaces, like having like the shared private courtyard, which gives a layer of security and privacy, could be an example of something to be combined. But this is a big subject. This could be.
I love your reflection and something to think about.
But I also think it's interesting. I was thinking. I remember being very interested. I down in São Paulo, very close to Anhangabaú. There is a Niemeyer building, which is a modernist Niemeyer building, but it's in an urban context. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's really interesting because when he had to, Niemeyer could do a modernist building in a juxtaposed urban block and do that building. So I think it's possible to combine the qualities, the benefits of modernism in the traditional city. And I think that's maybe the key take out of this is that urbanism planning is not the same as architecture. So I think maybe modern. You can do a traditional plan, but with modern architecture, and that's maybe the exciting part.
That's great. David, before we end, there's one last question by one of our supporters, Victor. So who should lead the implementation of the soft city? Public sector or private sector? And I would add, or both.
Yeah, I mean, ideally both. I mean, it's really, a funny question because, I would say in my professional life, half of my life has been working with the public sector and half with the private sector. So I don't have a favorite side. I have wonderful, wonderful people in the public sector and terrible ones, and wonderful, wonderful people in the private sector and terrible ones. So I'd say you work with, who should it with good people, and we need coalitions of good people who want to make a change. And some of them are in the private sector, some in the public. I don't know in Brazil, and I'm sure probably Victor knows better than me. I mean, the complexity of public sector. Maybe the public sector in Scandinavia is different. Like Japan is different from Brazil. What that means, I think it's about who's more effectively can deliver it. Well, it needs to be the enlightened people, and I think that then I would like to sit down with you. Maybe we could have a glass of wine and talk about who should lead that. Ideally, I think. Maybe the role of the public sector is to enable, to make it possible, maybe create guidelines of how to approach. I think maybe in general, it's the private sector is better at delivery. And it's about finding that balance. There's another question. Should there be rules?
I think he's trying to ask if we should reach a softer city by changing rules or regulation, or by building specific infrastructures, or through the architecture of the buildings, or a mix.
In a general way, yeah. I mean, the way we develop things, I think there's maybe some general things about scale requiring certain things. I mean, the other great thing about working with the private sector is I found capitalism is incredibly flexible. There are lots of different ways to make money, and what we've discovered, for example, by working this thing about the ground floors, it's more complicated. Rather than just doing the same building, you do something different on the ground floor. We've discovered we can unlock a new income stream. So it's more expensive to do a different ground floor, but the garden apartment suddenly becomes a commodity. And so it's a gift to the city because it's nicer, it's secure, it's more beautiful walking along the garden, the front doors and gardens, but it's also an attractive commodity of the people prepared to pay for. And this is the wonderful thing about the city. We've got a tradition where often the rich people have built beautiful houses that other people can enjoy looking at, nice streets to walk down. So it's somehow about finding the balance. And I think whether the role of the public sector is to be the rule maker or the frame maker, maybe it's more of a frame. And within that framework, there's a flexibility, and working maybe more with a value orientated rather than saying it's specific, like this height. It's these are the values that we want to achieve it. And then maybe the market or you'll find other ways different ways to deliver the same values.
Yeah.
Maybe a value-based approach is how to work. I wasn't expecting these kind of penetrating questions.
Oh, but I'm loving your answers.
David, thank you, Victor, and for those questions. There was just one thing. Percival had a question about the citizen. I think the idea of citizenship is about connecting the individual to the city. I mean, we've got one kind of like strain in society now. There's the United States, the American, very individualistic approach. And then you get Asia, Japan's the opposite, where you've only got the collective view. I think there's something in the middle, whereas a citizen, I'm an individual, but I'm part of something else. And I think the big part is seeing yourself as a citizen. What's my role? Whether I'm, humble or rich or poor or strong or weak, but I have a role in society as a citizen. And I think that the rights and responsibilities of citizenship is a very important subject, and that could be another conversation.
David, enjoying this conversation very much, but just respecting your time, I would like to ask you to share with us some final words. I don't know if there's a topic that you would have enjoyed sharing, or reflections about Brazil that you're interested in conveying to our public before we finish.
Well, I think I've already said that. I mean, if you compare the Danish population in this cold and our terrible climate, we're a cold country, you know, poor in resources. That's why it's forced us to organize ourselves. But we've managed to create this other kind of way of living in the city. Even our religion was against it. The Lutheran religion was not about hanging out and spending time, and but not being sociable and sensual. But we've learned that. We've learned to be more sociable and more sensual and having a more enjoyable life in our cities. So I think culturally, Brazil is so much more better prepared for that. And it's just a question of how you package that, or just make people understand that we do have choices about the kind of cities we live in. I mean, there's a kind of full circle, because also when I was a student, I mean, the epicenter of everything which is about sustainability and social sustainability was Curitiba. And so, like, I mean, if we've got, Jan Gehl in Scandinavia, you had Jaime Lerner. So there is also a really important stream or tradition in Brazil, which maybe you've forgotten about, or it's lost its cachet, it's lost its importance. So I mean, you invented so many things, like the BRT, or you found really innovative solutions. Like we're doing BRT now, like 30, 40 years later, we're now doing BRT. So there's kind of like lots of ways of learning. So I think you can also look inwardly and maybe revisit what happened there, what happened in Curitiba. And is there something there that you could find some renaissance?
For sure.
But I think you could culturally huge advantage, and it'd be much more fun hanging out with Brazilians than Scandinavians.
Yeah. So curiously, this year we did let's say, an urbanism mission to Curitiba with a group of Caos Planejado supporters with this objective of okay, how do we, let's say, get back what we have as a country as knowledge in urban planning? Because I was surprised to see at the Danish Center for Architecture, Jaime Lerner's book right next to Jan Gehl's book. And Jaime Lerner's work here in Brazil seems to be less valued than it is in Denmark, and which is unfortunate, I think. But this is something that we are trying to reinforce and get back through Caos Planejado today.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder what happened. I mean, I visited Curitiba myself, and I kind of wonder what happened. I think maybe in a way it was so successful because it kind of lifted so many people out of poverty. I mean, it really was so much more than just urbanism. It really was about a social dynamic of change. And what happened was, as people moved up, lifted out of poverty, having a better quality of life, there wasn't the next level. Like, what was because what's important is that the upper middle class in Scandinavia ride bikes. It's kind of, there's a whole culture around that. It's not just like a good solution for poor people. It's a good solution for everyone. And actually, there are lots of, I mean, the funny thing now is they've done research about academic performance of children in Denmark. And children that walk and cycle to school have a better academic performance than children that are driven to school by car. And this is like a big crisis for the middle class, because it means if you drive your kid to school, you're a bad parent. You want your kid to be a doctor, make him cycle. And of course, there's a common sense thing that basically when children walk and cycle to school, they've spent some energy, they've got some, kind of impressions and things, and they arrive to school awake and ready to learn.
Yeah.
If they come in the back of the car, shut up, I'm driving, the kids are kind of like arriving in school like zombies and need more time to kind of connect. So I think a kind of an education, that this thing about the public transport and walking and bikes and going to the public park, that's not just for poor people. I mean, it's nice if you're poor, but it's nice for everyone. And I think it's kind of lifting that. And maybe somehow what happened was a coup d'etat, but people got, like, a generation got better off. Then they bought a car. And they kind of had a more, like, and there wasn't maybe a form of housing or a lifestyle which kind of embraced the aspiration that came with social change, with social and economic improvement. But it's a really super interesting question. And like I said, like, Jaime Lerner is a huge hero for us in the Nordic countries.
That's I love to end these webinars, these episodes with positive and optimistic view. So David, thank you once again. I'm a big fan of your work.
Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for the questions. I wish I had more time to answer them more detail. And I hope sometime soon I can get to Brazil and meet you all in person.
I hope so too. Let's try to make that happen soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye. Ciao. Bye. I go goodbye.